By the time I'm finished, there'll be a fallout, and if all goes as planned, it ain't just me, we all out. Kefka!
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com down there. You know by now, we like magic. Today, I'm back. After a brief holiday respite, took a couple of days off. I was waiting for these Aether Revolt spoilers to come out so I could show you those. But they haven't. We saw the masterpieces. A bunch of other YouTubers have already covered those, including Wedge. Go check those out if you haven't seen them yet. But in lieu of spoilers, I figured I'd do a deck tech, but not for Kaladesh Standard because the format's going to be different in like 2 weeks, right? So I figured I would talk about a format that doesn't rotate, is super budget all the time. It's the whole point of the format. We're going to talk about a Pauper deck today. Now again, Pauper is a budget format by design, but some decks can still get into the hundreds of dollars, and that's ridiculous. We don't want none of that mess. It's a budget format. So what is the most successful deck in the format for under $20 paper? Well, a good answer to that. Burn, that too. And Mono Black Control, which is a much more interesting deck. I'm going to show it to you today. Before I get started here, I just wanted to take a quick second and give a shout out to the professor from Tellurian Community College. He gave me a shout out in his 180K subscribers Q&A video just the other day. So I figured I would return the favor, shout him out, and tell you that not only is this deck for all of you who love budget and love Pauper, and that's obviously a lot of you, but also for the professor, because I know Pauper is one of his favorite formats, and if you haven't checked out his Super Koldatha Brothers deck tech for only 50 bucks, you should do that when you get done with this video. But Mono Black Control, let's get started talking about that. First of all, black is a great color for Pauper because it's always been known as having the best removal, period, especially at the common level. White has decent removal, but a lot of it's not common. Not so for black. Some of the best removal pieces in Magic are at the common level, which helps this deck out a lot. But black also has a variety of really annoying and strong creatures at the common level, which I'm going to start the deck with. There's 21 creatures in the deck, and the most recent addition to this deck, as far as I can tell from results, is the 4 Cuombajj Witches in the deck. I haven't seen this card in 12 years, something like that. And right now, the online version of the card actually costs a little bit more than the paper version of the card, and it makes the deck slightly more expensive online, which is kind of amazing. But if you're going to buy them in paper, you can get them as low as about 40 cents for the Chronicles version and about 60 cents for the Anthologies version. But hey, if you want to splurge and get the original version of the card, which does look awesome, I think it's only like $2.50 or $3, which is still a hell of a deal. But what's the actual function of the card in this deck? I like this deck because it reminds me a little bit of a slower version of Suicide Black. We've got a couple of things that deal damage to us, but in this case, they'll also deal damage to our opponent. Aside from that, it's a decent body for a decent cost, at least in this format, and it helps us out with Black Devotion for a card we'll see a little bit later on down the line that is an all-star in the deck. One of the key pieces in the deck. This card helps out a lot on turn 2. So, all those things considered, we're going to play all 4 copies of the Witches. Before I move on real quick, I also like that one of these Witches looks a little bit like Amethyst from Steven Universe, because, like, that's cool. Amethyst, you fine, girl. Which, by the way, before you get on to me for thinking a cartoon character is attractive, T-Pain just recently said that his favorite crystal gem is also Amethyst because she's fine. So I'm in good company here. Moving on, though, to the 3-drop slot. We're going to start that with the most annoying card in the deck, Chittering Rats, at a full playset, and the deck invariably plays a playset of this card because it's so annoying to play against. If you've never seen this card, it looks unassuming at first, but if you've played against it, you know how irritating it is to play against. That's why we're going to play all 4 of them, because the card is just stupid, especially in the early game, even sometimes in the late game when they're sort of in top deck mode. If they've still got a card or 2 in their hand, you'd be like, nope, you're not drawing anything important next turn, brother. So by the time it rolls around to our next turn, we know they haven't drawn any gas at all. That's a lot more, like, annoying than it looks. The deck also pretty much always plays 4 copies of Phyrexian Rager, just about no matter what. Good value creature, you get a 2/2 body for 3 mana, which is not great or anything, that's just Scathe Zombies. But we also get to draw the card. And again, we've got a bunch of stuff later on down the line on the curve here that will gain us a bunch of life back all at one time, so we don't have to worry so much about the damage it does to us. We are just interested in drawing the card and putting a solid body on the battlefield. To finish up the 3-drops, we're going to just play 3 copies of Liliana's Spectre, which is occasionally a 4 of in the deck. But mostly we're playing this to have an evasive threat out on the battlefield that can also block flyers like Glenhawk and stuff, or do some damage in the mid-game itself. And it also, again, helps out with Devotion a lot. So just a quality utility piece that can either act aggressively or defensively, depending on what you're playing against. But favorite creature in the deck, I loved this creature when he was in Standard just a couple of years ago. 4 whole copies of Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Key piece in this deck. Sometimes this can come down on turn 5 and deal anywhere between 4 to 6 damage, and sometimes, if you do it right, even as much as 8 drain on turn 5. And if you top deck this in the late game and you've got a fairly established board, and by the way, Pauper games usually tend to have like big board stalls if the game goes on long, because there's not a whole lot of quality removal and there's certainly hardly any mass removal. So big board states will happen, and when this card comes down on turn 10 or 12, it can be ridiculous and just end up draining 10 to 12 damage for you depending on what you've got out. So Grey Merchant is probably one of the most critical pieces in the deck and can either put you right back in the game against decks like Burn or Kuldotha or decks that strike very quickly, or it can sometimes finish the game off later on. So perfect piece with a nice big butt on it that can block a lot of stuff and drain a bunch of stuff life for you when it comes in the battlefield, put you right back in the game, or just finish them off. Fantastic card. And to finish up the creatures, we're going to play a staple of the Pauper format. 2 copies of Gurmag Angler in this deck. We got a lot of small creatures that go to the graveyard fairly easily, and we've got a lot of removal spells and such that we're going to cast for just 1 or 2 mana, meaning that we can fill up our graveyard fairly fast in this deck. Pretty much any black deck in Pauper is going to play some amount of Gurmag Angler, though, because the creature is so value. You can get a 5/5 for as little as 1 mana. You want to play that. In the spells here, I'm going to just cover 1 card before I get to the rest of the spells, because the rest of the spells are removal. We're just going to play 4 copies of Sign in Blood for card advantage. Very, very cheap card advantage. Just 2 mana to generate 1 card in advantage is an insane deal, and worth the 2 life all day, because cards like Grey Merchant and something else that we'll cover a little bit later in the spells here can really boost our life total by turn 4, 5, or a little bit later in the game. So again, not too worried about the damage or anything. We just want the 2 cards. 2 cards for 2 mana is the kind of deal you would have to Sign in Blood for in terms of magic value. So you play all 4 of these because it's just always a ridiculous card. Sign in Blood is crazy. In this a little bit more budget version of the deck, I'm going to play 4 copies of Geth's Verdict. But if you have a couple of extra dollars, and it really won't cost you that much, just play 4 copies of Chainer's Edict instead. The flashback on Chainer's Edict is more than worth the sorcery speed. Not that big of a deal, because we can cast it twice, especially in the late game. So play Chainer's Edict if you've got the few extra dollars. I think it's 15 or 20 extra dollars to play Chainer's Edict. That's the whole budget of the deck right there. But if you want to keep it super duper low, especially for the paper version, then just play 4 copies of Geth's Verdict. It's instant speed and accomplishes the same goal, but just the 1 time. This is really, really good against all the Bogles decks in the format, which are kind of, from what I can tell from looking at the recent results, kind of establishing more of a foothold lately. And you don't want to be on the other side of a huge slippery Bogle, So just make him sacrifice that stupid thing at instant speed. We're also going to play 2 Victim of Night here, because honestly, the things that we can't hit with Victim of Night are not very popular in the Pauper format. So this is a lot of times just 2 mana for kill whatever. We see them sometimes, so we're not going to play the full 4 of or anything, but I have seen decks that play as many as 3 because it is a quality piece of almost unconditional removal. Moving a little bit down on the curve here, we're going to play 2 copies of Disfigure. Now, if you don't have the 40 cents for these, whatever, you could also just pay 5 cents for Dead Weight. More or less accomplishes the same goal here, but a little bit harder to get into the graveyard for Gurmag Angler, so there's that. But you could decrease the budget by like almost $1 by just putting in Dead Weight instead of Disfigure, but whatever, There's a lot of creatures in this format that just have 1 or 2 toughness, especially in some of the most popular decks, Delver decks, you kill that stupid thing for just 1 mana. That's pretty cool. Almost everything in Kuldotha can be killed by this, There's a lot of really low to the ground aggro and stuff, and Disfigure is fantastic for just 1 mana against all those decks. Play a couple of copies made. I'm going to talk about 2 cards at the same time here to finish off the spells, and that is 3 copies of Tendrils of Corruption and 1 copy of Corrupt in the deck. You don't often see this split. A lot of times you'll see 4 Tendrils of Corruption, or maybe you'll see 2 Tendrils and 2 Corrupt, maybe no Tendrils and 2 Corrupt. That happens too. But bottom line, all of these decks are going to play some amount of these cards at the top of the removal curve to gain a bunch of life back on turn 4, turn 6, or later on in the game. Because we're facing off against a lot of decks that hit pretty hard fairly fast. We've got a lot of removal to stave the damage off a little bit, but we still want to be able to gain a bunch of life late game to get right back in the game and reset things, especially against decks like Burn. If Tendrils of Corruption can take out a small creature and end up gaining us, 4 to 8 life, something like that, then we are right back into things and we are probably going to win the game. Tendrils is probably the better card here, but in cases of decks where, they don't play a whole lot of creatures or games are going to go fairly long, we want the option to hit the face. That's very important too. Corrupt is that card. Again, one more time, I can't stress how important these and Grey Merchant of Asphodel are in the deck. We're taking a fair amount of damage from our own cards early on in the game, and there's decks like Burn that can decrease our life total very, very fast. So cards like Tendrils and Grey Merchant are absolute key pieces critical to the deck's success. But onto the lands here, which we're playing 23 of. Looks fairly low, but we're only generating black mana, and most of our cards cost, 2 to 3 mana anyway. So 23 lands is about right. We want to play some Barren Moors for the cycling, and we want to play a Bojuka Bog so that we don't have to deal with things like Delve and stuff. So there's that. Pretty simple mana base. Here's the sideboard for you right here. Pretty cut and dried, honestly. A lot of these mono black sideboards play a lot of the same cards, but in Pauper, sideboards are very flexible, so keep that in mind. First of all, we're going to talk about the 3 Duress, great against control decks and good against the mirror match. That's one thing, but also good against a lot of stuff right now. Duress is just good and maybe could be main deck, but we're prioritizing creature removal more. Grim Harvest is very good, and sometimes you'll see Unearth in this slot, and sometimes you'll see Unearth in the main deck as well. So Unearth is ridiculous, but Grim Harvest allows you to do this over and over, and that's always good as far as I'm concerned. We've also got Relic of Progenitus along with Bojuka Bog in the sideboard here to just make sure that we don't have to deal with graveyard strategies if we don't want to. Shrivel is very important against not only Koldatha's tokens, but also white tokens. It's good against Delver decks. It's good against a lot of stuff. Choking Sands is great against not only control type decks, but also good against things that want to play like 3 colors, like the Jeskai artifacts decks, Koldatha decks and stuff. Anything that wants to play 3 colors, Choking Sands is insanely good against. And finally, Wrench Mind is in the deck again against control, and also conveniently against Burn. We can side out a couple of pieces of removal in game 2 and 3 and put in these Wrench Minds so that on turn 2 we can go ahead and get a couple of cards out of their stinking hand, and they won't have as many options to burn us with, basically. Here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 63, which is really good for a deck that's made of nothing but commons and costs less than $20. Although we are playing some of the best commons in black, period, but it's not like they're blue commons. Blue commons can get really, really expensive. It's not like they're Lightning Bolt or anything. That can get fairly expensive too, but we're not doing that. We're playing black commons, which are all fairly inexpensive and keeps the deck very, very low. So try this thing out. I really honestly think it's one of the most underestimated decks in this whole format. Everyone's crazy about their Delvers and their Koldathas and stuff, but this deck, my friends, is something that you don't see every day, but can win. I've seen a bunch of these mono black control decks, different lists, go to 5-0 on MTG Online. So check the stupid thing out. If your store does a Pauper League or maybe Pauper Saturdays or a Pauper F&M, some stores do that, then, just try it out. I mean, you can build this deck out of the commons box of a lot of stores, except for maybe the Witches, but you can replace those with removal or Akiba Gang Shinobi. I see that a lot in lists for this deck too. So a lot of different options for it. I've already told you Unearth is an option as well. There's a bunch of stuff that you could play in this deck because black has a lot of quality commons that either remove creatures, are decent creatures, or can get creatures back from the graveyard. Those are all desirable effects. The one major stumbling block for this deck is its inability, of course, to deal with artifacts, something that black has always had a problem with. So sometimes these Koldatha decks can be a problem, and often affinity decks can be a problem as well. But honestly, most of those decks, even though they're playing artifacts, are playing creature artifacts, which we have no problem taking out whatsoever. It's like Ichor Wellspring is like the only thing that we can't kill in a lot of these decks. So we're not too worried about artifacts, but always keep that in your mind that black is a color that on the color pie doesn't get to deal with artifacts. For now, I'm tapped out. That's all I've got. Let me know down there in the sideboard how you feel about this deck, how you think it could change, what black commons people are missing when they construct this deck, how you build it, all that stuff, man. I'm always interested to hear from you, and I will catch you guys later. If you enjoyed the content, hit the like button. That helps me out a lot. Obviously, that's all YouTubers tell you to do that, and they tell you to do that for a reason. You can also sub if you're new. I'm trying to get to 50K now, you guys. Help me out with that, and hit the bell to make sure you get the notifications. I'm pretty sure that's everything. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.